Hello and namaste everyone. Thank you very much for taking time to tune in. We are continuing our series of episodes where we are talking about to be free and how to attain health, happiness and harmony through this freedom. In fact, in today's session, we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the story of senses. Senses pretty much regulate our life. We know the five senses. The sound, the one through which we hear, the touch, the smell, the taste, and then the sight. In fact, ancient wisdom calls these Shabda, Sparsa, Rasa, Rupa, Gandha. These are the five senses. But we don't really understand these senses very well because we think at the sense organ level in our day-to-day life. We know that we have sense organs which we can of course see physically, like the ear, the nose, the tongue, the eyes, and then the skin. But behind these sense organs are these senses of perception that we just said, the Shabda, Sparsa, Rupa, Rasa and Gandha. These are the perceptions that utilize these sense organs to transfer the information from the external world to inside for us to process. For example, when you have some food out there on the table, your eyes see it, your nose smells it, and your hands go grab it and then puts it in your mouth, your tongue tastes it and then eats it. See how different sense organs with the power of those inner senses were able to perform an action the moment they had some perception of change in the environment outside. So we know that this is how everything works. In fact, we work with the basis of these senses. Without these senses, we cannot perform any duty in our life. So our life pretty much depends on these sense organs to perform our day-to-day duties. Now, if we want to really understand senses and their origin, ancient wisdom actually takes us a little bit deeper into the sense perceptions, and these are called as tanmatras. Tanmatras are the subtler senses through which the sense organs are regulated. In fact, we have been talking in our series about the subtler elements that make us, or for example, our physical body, our subtle body. All of these are made up of these subtler elements. In the subtler elements are called as Panchabhutas, the five elements. We know those five elements. The first element is the ether or the space. Next comes the air, fire, water, and earth, the solid material. So these five subtle elements is what makes up our body. Now, even the sense organs actually have a very deeper association with these five elements. In fact, if you start with the sense of let's take the sound, Shabda. Shabda, the sound, has association with the ether or the space element. And then the Sparsa, the touch, has association with the air element, because when there is air, we feel air, and the touch travels through that air element. Sound travels through that ether, the sound travels through that space element. And then Shabda, Sparsa, Rupa, which is the sight. The sight actually, you won't realize, is activated because of the fire element. There are thousands of these photon receptors in our eyes. The light that enters, of course, is the fire element, and that gets stimulated and then stimulates our sight. So the fire element is the basis of our sight. And then comes the rasa, which is the taste. Rasa means the juice. And then, of course, the moment I say juice, you know what element is associated with it. It is associated with the water element, the liquid. So that because of the juices only we are able to taste whatever we take it inside our mouth, and the tongue tastes that because of that rasa element. And then comes the gandha, which is the smell. And the smell is associated with the earth element. You need something solid for that fragrance to come from, so it is associated with that solid, the earth element. So if you see, we started with sense organs, we went into the sense perceptions, inner senses, and then we have gone further down into the tanmatras, or the subtler elements. So this is how the senses perform our duties in our day-to-day life. Now, why are they important? And we kind of talked about, because they are the gateways of information, because everything that is happening in your external world enters into you, your body or your mind, through those senses. And then these 5 sense organs are so powerful that I'll tell you a simple story to help you understand how useful or how detrimental they can be. Now, we'll take example from the animal kingdom. I myself, being a veterinarian, I totally enjoy connecting to the animals, and how these animals also are regulated with these senses. Now, if you look at how these senses can trap us, we'll start taking each animal and see how these animals actually get trapped because of those 5 senses. Now, the sense of sound, the deer, the deers in the forest, they're very sensitive to sound, and they get trapped because of the sound element. They are the most sensitive to the sound element, and then they get trapped because of the sound element. And now the sense of smell, we'll take the smell. Now the bees, we know the bees that go after the flowers, they get actually attracted to flowers because of the fragrance, the smell, and then they go in search of that flower. And then when they get into that flower, drinking that nectar, sometimes they can get trapped in that flower. See how the sense of smell is trapping a bee or attracting that to a flower. And then let's take the sense of taste. That sense of taste is very predominant in fish. The fish in the water, when a person on the shore throws a bait into the water, of course he puts like a small worm or some kind of piece of flesh to the bait, and then drops it into the water, and then the fish immediately reaches to it, and because of its craving for the taste, it gets trapped by the bait. See, if you see how these different senses are trapping different animals because of the weakness that they have for that sense perception. And then the touch, the sense of touch. Elephant, for example, it's huge, it's massive, it is so difficult to control an elephant. But how does the mahout, the person who's sitting on the elephant, control the elephant? He controls it by using that metal and wooden spear that he has, by just pressing it onto the skin, and the moment it perceives that touch, it gets trapped, it gets controlled with that sense of touch. So if you look at these different sense organs and different animals, how they trap each of these individual animals because of the weakness or the craving that they have for the senses. Now, if you look at us humans, I can only leave it to your imagination how we are trapped with all the 5 senses. If each of these animals is getting trapped with one sense organ or one sense perception, we are unfortunately getting trapped because of all these attractions and pleasures that we derive from all the sense organs, not one. So can you imagine how miserable our lives are? Because when we start to get addicted to these sense organs, we of course start to get into the craving cycle, the vicious cycle of that cravings, and then that cravings eventually lead to addictions, and that addictions eventually cause illness. We talked about this in the previous episodes, the psychosomatic. It is all in the mind. It is all starting with these sense organs. Because of our inability to regulate our senses or control our senses, we are getting trapped. Simple example, people have cravings for food, cravings for sweet, cravings for chocolate, cravings for alcohol, cravings for tobacco, cravings for vaping, cravings for drugs. All of these, even though they seem simple, they seem completely outside us, they actually get inside us. And once they get inside us, they start to regulate. I mean, even though it starts at a sense level, it enters the mind, it enters the body, and what happens eventually is it results in disease. We see so many people getting addicted. And again, these addictions may seem simple to begin with, but the power of these senses is that they will trap you. They have so much of energy and so much of power. Now, let's actually try to understand how these sense organs work. In fact, ancient wisdom calls these sense organs as indriyas. Indriyas are the senses. Now, there are three elements to this, how this entire sense perception happens. So there is the sense organ, which we see outside, and the information goes inside, and the inner senses perceive that, whether it's a sight or smell or sound or touch or taste, and then it passes that information to the mind which is called as manasu. And then mind is aware of that information, and it takes that information and then it sends it to intellect, which is called buddhi. So first step is attraction by the senses. Second step is your mind pays attention to that attraction, and then it sends that information to buddhi or the intellect to make a decision. So it's a three-step process: attraction, attention, and decision. But of course, we don't realize this in our day-to-day life, because all of these things happen in a flash of a second. Like, you don't even realize you're looking at that nice piece of tiramisu or chocolate cake, and then a flash of a second, it's in your mouth. All of these three things are happening in a flash of a moment. Now, this is where the crux of understanding of senses is, and the processing and the power of senses can be realized. So this attraction sometimes is so powerful, it doesn't even give enough time for the mind to process it, nor for the buddhi or the intellect to make a decision. And we know that we want to control. We say, oh, you know what, from today I'm going to stop eating sweets. From today I'm going to be very careful about chocolate. If at office, at work, if somebody has a birthday party, they serve cake, I'm not going to touch it. But then you know that the moment the cake is served, your eyes look at it, you start getting tempted, and then immediately you just go grab, you say, okay, I'll have one bite. We know that. And that one bite becomes 10 bites. Because the senses, the mind, and the buddhi intellect, and then behind that is our beautiful brain. Instantly the brain gets into the action. There is a reward circuitry system inside your brain, which is controlled by this amazing neuropeptide called dopamine. Dopamine is released in your brain. It gives a sense of pleasure, and the moment you get that sense of pleasure, it wants more, and then it will send a signal back, and then the senses are like, oh, get more, and then another bite, and then again dopamine kick. Imagine this dopamine kick happens at a very small level in case of chocolate cake or tiramisu or whatever food you like. But imagine the same dopamine working at a peak level in addictions like tobacco, alcohol, drugs, and other things. And that is where the power of dopamine is so strong that people get trapped into it. They want to get the dopamine kick over and over and again, and they get trapped in that addiction. So what starts as a simple thing, people say, when they are teenagers, when they are at school, somebody says, hey, why don't you try smoking? Yes, it's good. You have one puff. And then right after that, it hits your brain. It starts with the senses, it ended up in the brain, and then you get that sense of pleasure. You want more of that, and you want more of that, and you continue doing that, you get trapped in that. So this is how this attraction, attention, and decision making cycle works. In fact, when you do not have the ability to regulate or control your senses, our life becomes like a horse, a wild horse. In fact, ancient text Katha Upanishad beautifully gives a wonderful analogy for how the senses are regulated. So the senses are compared to these 5 horses. These 5 senses are compared to the 5 horses in the front. And then the reins for those 5 horses is your mind, is your conscious mind, which passes that information. And then the charioteer, the person who's regulating that horses and sitting in a chariot, is the buddhi, the intellect. So the intellect has the reins, and the reins are holding the horses. And as long as intellect, the decision making aspect of your mind, is able to hold those reins properly and regulate those senses, the chariot will go whichever way we want. But the moment the charioteer or the intellect lets go of that, or clouded by something else, or diluted by other things, and he gets distracted or she gets distracted, that's it. He lets go of the reins, and then the horses can go wild. They don't have any control. They can go whichever way it wants. And unfortunately, my dear friends, all of our lives are going in the similar manner without any control. We think we have control, but we know, you know, and we all know the states of our lives. And my life used to be like that at 33. When I came to Master Sunita at the age of 33, I didn't know of any of these things. Zero knowledge, zero awareness about how the mind works, how the senses work, how the buddhi works. But after I embraced Sukshma meditation, as I started to go deeper and deeper, I started to understand the power of these senses. And I started to understand where the source is. We think the source is in the sense organs. It is not. Why do you think we want to control and we are unable to control? If the power was in the eyes, we could just tell eyes, no, don't do this. If the power was in the ears, we could just shut down the ears. No. Even if people try to do that, people who have the cravings, this. You leave the place, but you're still thinking about it. So where is the processing happening? Is the processing happening in the sense organs or the senses? Or it is happening inside? Where is it happening? It is happening in your mind. What is the mind? That is the subtle body. That is the Sukshma Sarira. What is it that is moving inside that mind? What is it that's moving inside the mind? These ancient wisdom calls as vasanas. Vasanas are these temptations that have been following you birth after birth. Forget about birth after birth. People may believe in it, may not believe it. We'll leave it to their discretion. But these subconscious patterns are these vasanas that are there. And you start getting attracted to that over and over again. Now, vasanas, which means that subconscious patterns, they create more patterns. Because now you got tempted, you attracted to that, you eat that, you taste that, and then you want more of that. Which means in the field of mind, what is happening? There is more turbulence, more disturbance, which are called as vrittis by the yogic wisdom. Vasanas lead to vrittis. Now these vrittis, more patterns, create more vasanas, more patterns. See, the vasanas and vrittis are just getting into a vicious circle, one creating the other, one creating the other, and it becomes a very strong bond. Of course, this entire thing in the modern scientific way is called as neuroplasticity. These are all creating tightening your neural networks, strengthening those neural networks. There are so many scientific studies we can talk about in another episode probably. How the reward circuitry we talked about in the brain gets impacted, and there are fMRI studies to show different parts of the brain how the neural networks become strengthened in certain area and become weakened in the another area. And all of this is happening as an outcome of the mind. My dear friends, remember, brain is just an organ, just like the sense organs. What is happening is inside, that subtle Sukshma Sarira. Same thing with the brain. Your mind is creating your brain. Your mind is regulating your brain. There is that subtle difference which very ancient wisdom beautifully understood. And that mind is part of what they call the subtle body or Sukshma Sarira. And that subtle body is where the vasanas and vrittis are lurking around in the darkness. And when we activate those, it instantly puts our physical part into action, and that imprints get into your brain, and then brain now starts to regulate the mind, and they get into this vicious circle, and you can't come out of that trap. So this is how, my dear friends, how the senses work. Now let us try to understand how to regulate this. It is easier said than done. Of course, I did not know, I did not have an understanding of it unless and until I came to this ancient, says Sunita Amma. Now, I will talk about how Sukshma can do this, but before that, I also want us to take references from ancient texts. For example, the Yogic wisdom, the 8 limbs of yoga, which the great ancient sage Patanjali talks about. In that, one of the most important steps is pratyahara. Pratyahara means withdrawal of the senses. So the analogy for this is a tortoise whose limbs are outside, but then the moment there is a threat it feels, it just draws it inside. So that you don't see, you only see the shell of the tortoise outside and you think it's a rock, but it's actually a tortoise which has withdrawn everything inside. Ancient yogic wisdom says we need to withdraw our senses and hold them inside all the time and use them only when needed. Can you believe how powerful that act would be? Which means we have closed all the gates, all the doors of these senses. Not like this, not like this. Inside, not outside. Inside, we have regulated the senses to withdraw them into where? Using that mind, using those reins into the buddhi, into the intellect. If you want, we can go one more step further. Into the subtle self, into the I, into the Atma. When you withdraw everything back, involution is happening. In that involution, you will start to evolve. Evolution will happen. So, pratyahara is withdrawal of senses. Easier said than done, I know my dear friends. And this other one, beautiful from ancient wisdom, is a great text called Tattva Bodha, written by the great ancient saint Adi Shankaracharya. And in that he says sadhana chatushtayam. There are 4 steps for a person who wants to practice this regulation so that you can experience your true self. Sadhana is practice, regular, rigorous practice. Chatushtaya means 4 steps. We will talk about it in another episode in detail. But out of that, there is one thing called Shad Sampat, means 6 steps. And in those 6 steps, there is one step which is called Dhamma. The first one is called Sama, second one is called Dhamma. Dhamma is again the regulation of senses. So if you look at any great ancient text, whether it is Upanishads, whether it is Bhagavad Gita, whether it is Patanjali Yoga Sutras, or whether it is great Advaitic text, Tattva Bodha, all of them are referencing to the same aspect of withdrawal of the senses as a very important aspect. Now, many people might think this is only required for the spiritual practitioners, which I do not agree. We need this, as we have just observed, for our day-to-day life. Forget about spiritual practice. Sunita Amma says, when people come to her and ask about spirituality, she says, forget about spirituality for some time. First, focus on your practical day-to-day life. Are you able to create proper habits? Do you have proper discipline? Do you have proper control over your senses, around your cravings, around sweets, around alcohol, around tobacco, around overeating food? People, when they see food, I hear some people saying, my eyes are bigger than my stomach. What does that mean? which means that your eyes, not these physical eyes, it's not that physical eyes are bigger than your stomach. That inner eye, the moment it sees the food, it's like, I want to eat more. I want all of this. When I see some people, the moment they see food on the table, they just start walking like as if they want to eat everything. They fill up the plate fully. And then they eat, and then again they go back, and then again they eat till they can't eat anymore. What is happening here, my dear friends? Inner senses. Inner senses are regulating all this. They are making you act this way. Now, this is where Sukshma becomes a very, very powerful tool. What I have experienced and what everyone who has come to Sukshma has experienced is, without realizing that inner senses get cleansed. What are that inner senses? Those vasanas, those patterns and tendencies that we carry for a long period of time, birth to birth or within the same birth, those start to get cleansed. And once they start to get cleansed, automatically your senses are purified, your mind is still, your buddhi, which is that sukshma buddhi, that subtle intellect, is blossoming, like shining. Why is it shining? Behind that there is the master. Who is the master? The Atma, the soul, the self. The self is shining, and it's shining that light into the buddhi, the intellect, and the intellect is now vigilant. You know how you can easily catch thief? When there is beautiful light, right? You know, they have this light around the jails or the prisons. They keep shifting that light around the prison because they want to catch the thief. Because when there is light, it is easy to catch. When there is no light, it's all dark, so the thieves can run around and do all kinds of stuff. Same thing. The thieves here are our sense organs, senses. When you have that buddhi blossomed and lightened, there is full of light inside, then all these thieves cannot do anything. They run away because they know that they can get caught. So that is what happens in Sukshma. And this happens effortlessly. And that is why I have been so strongly, passionately talking about the power of Sukshma. It is not just a technique. Yes, techniques can come later. But this ancient says, Sunita Amma, with the power of that pure vibrations, is able to cleanse that subtle body, that Sukshma Sarira. And once that Sukshma Sarira's vasanas and vrittis are cleared, everything comes to stillness. I have seen people who come with all kinds of addictions to Amma, and they say after a few sessions, they have dropped their smoking, they have dropped their alcohol, they have dropped even drugs. Why do you think this is happening? And if that is so easy, you can imagine people who come to her with even little food cravings. Like, for example, I used to like sweets, or I used to like some types of food in the past. I immediately dropped automatically. It was not like, oh, I have to drop these cravings now. Every person who comes to Sukshma tells this. Amma, I am now not craving for food anymore. I don't have craving for chocolate anymore. I don't have craving for wine anymore. Because that subtle Sukshma Sarira is getting cleansed. And once that cleansing happens, perfect sense control, perfect sense withdrawal, you will live in constant integrated awareness where nothing can disturb you. Okay, so I hope you understood the story of senses. What are senses? How are they working? How do we need to regulate? And how we can use them for our benefit in our day-to-day life. So with that, let's just relax. Relax your shoulders. Always check, subtle check. Where is my perception right now? Am I with me, or are my senses wandering everywhere? Are they craving for something? When you have, cravings, just get up, jump, do some skipping, do some Sukshma exercises, yoga exercises, whatever. Distract them, because you have to stop that attraction. They're getting attracted to food. They are getting attracted to bad things. Immediately distract them. That's the first step. So do some jumping, skipping, running, get away from that space. I've worked closely with addiction centers here in Vancouver area. And we have taught These simple things that they can use in their day-to-day life. I've seen phenomenal benefits from that. Tapping the body, self-compassion, very important. Why do we go after all these addictions? Is because we don't love ourselves. We don't have compassion for ourselves. If you realize how precious this body is, how precious this life is, you wouldn't get attracted to all those things. You will be stabilized. Bring that subtle smile. Always be in that subtle awareness. Your breath is another powerful tool to regulate your senses. You have that craving. I tell people this simple exercise. Stop breathing for a moment. Close both the nostrils and your mouth. And see how your mind operates at that time. Normally, we have a craving, it will just run after everything, right? But then the moment you close your nostrils, you are now running for your life, not for cravings. So immediately mind will shift from there to here, and it will be like struggling to breathe. Your body starts to struggle to breathe. It's like, I need air now, I need, and then boom. Of course, these are simple techniques. These are simple tools that you can use to regulate, but real cleaning has to happen. There is no escape for that. There is no escape for that, because these patterns, if not now, will come back and bite you. So you need like rigorous discipline and practice every day with all of these things. And then you can do your deep breathing. Reinforce those practices that we have been doing through this series. Breathe and smile throughout the day. Pay attention. Pay attention to your breath. Pay attention to your smile. Pay attention to your heart. Give yourself a hug if you want. Treat yourself with love and respect. Don't abuse. Even if you have cravings, even if you are distracted by these senses, don't abuse yourself. Don't hate yourself. That's okay. You know the root cause now. People go into a guilt trip afterwards. Yes, feeling guilty is right, but don't stay there. Learn from that guilt. And then come back and give that extra love for yourself. Give that confidence for yourself. Pat yourself and say, that's okay. I'm going to do better next time. Step by step. Sunita Amma says, bit by bit makes a habit. So take small steps. Reassure yourself. It's going to be okay. I love you. I respect you. I honor you. I'll take care of you. Physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. This is my promise to you, Suman. Give that promise to yourself. You are answerable to yourself, not for outside world. You are your best judge. take small steps. Make consistent progress. Discipline every day. Just staying in this hug for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even more. This is meditation. To regulate your mind is meditation. To regulate your senses is meditation. To strengthen your buddhi, intellect, is meditation. To get in touch with your true self, that pure, subtle self, is true meditation, my dears. All the practices, whether it is yogasanas, pranayamas, whatever you do, doesn't matter. Ultimately, it has to come to this. Your subtle Sukshma has to be cleansed, purified. Your buddhi has to become enlightened. You should see that light or lamp always on in your intellect. Not pseudo-intellect, which is doing analysis. It will only lead to paralysis. Wholesome intellect. Putting it all together. That intellect should become light to guide you, not dissect and get stuck in that analysis. You should move to synthesis, putting it all together, becoming one. Fill your heart with that love, self-love. Fill your heart with that compassion, self-compassion. Fill your heart with that inner confidence, self-confidence, self-esteem, self-satisfaction. You are satisfied with yourself. You don't need some external stimulant to satisfy you. You don't need pleasures to satisfy you. Yourself is enough to satisfy you. Yes, food is important to give strength to the body. Pleasant music is good for your soul. Subtle fragrances of flowers is good for your soul. But not addictions. There is inner fragrance, inner smell, inner taste, inner touch, inner sound, inner sight. You can stay like this for however long you want. Let go of any distractions and come back to your inner self. Keep spreading that smile, paying attention to your breath. Be there, be there, be there.